Okay, so let's come on to Bob Lazar. If you don't know who Bob Lazar is, he claims that he worked for naval intelligence and was recruited into a secret project where he was taken to an area near Area 51, the famous UFO place, and he was taken into a secret installation and he was shown flying disc technology that the Americans somehow had got off extraterrestrials. All right, and he was working as a physicist trying to work out how these UFOs functioned. And as I said, many people have asked me to get Bob Lazar's interviews analysed, and this analysis comes from Peter Hyatt, not from Genevieve Lewis. Okay, so let's go with it.
Did you witness any disc technology at Area 51?
No, there was absolutely no ET craft, ET technology, anything like that at Area 51. This is why S4 was made specifically to separate it there. People at Area 51 do not have the clearance.
No is a good answer. The subject then weakens his answer. Absolutely adds weakness to no. The subject expands disc technology to include ET craft, ET technology, anything like that. If the subject has knowledge of what is in Area 51, he has added sensitivity to it, reducing the reliability of his words. If he has no knowledge, the sensitivity could be from his need to persuade that he knows what is there and what is not. The subject introduces people to the statement. Who are people? This is a passive description of the personnel of a high-security facility. Staff or personnel would be a more appropriate description of people.
How long were you employed at S4, and when were you hired?
When was I hired at S4? I guess early '89, and I was probably there only about 6 months or so, on a very infrequent basis.
The subject pauses, indicating sensitivity to the question. He takes a moment to think before answering. When he does answer, he avoids the question, how long were you employed at S4, which demonstrates sensitivity to the question, and answers with, when I was hired, but with the weakness of I guess. This is not the strong linguistic connection that is expected. What is causing the weakness? The subject now answers the first question of how long he worked there. This again is answered with a weak linguistic commitment.
How were you transported to and from work?
At the time that I was working there at McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas, there was a Special Projects EG&G building.
The question was, how were you transported? It is unnecessary for the subject to tell us I was working there in answering this question. It is, however, important to the subject. We must consider if the subject has a need to persuade us that he was working there. Was he really working there? The unnecessary information also slows down the pace of his reply, allowing him time to think what he is going to say in response to the question of how were you transported.
When I was told to go to work, I drove there, parked my car there, and got in a plane at the airport, flew to Groom Lake, where I deplaned and waited for a bus, and the bus drove me down to S4.
The element of time appears again. Told is authoritative and would be consistent with the subject's account. I drove there. This is a simple, reliable sentence without qualifiers. It does not specify the airport or the special projects building. We do not know from the subject's words where he drove. Is it necessary to tell us he drove to the airport? The question was, how were you transported to and from work? If the subject were telling us the truth, it is likely he would simply tell us they flew us down to S4 on a private flight. The rest is unnecessary information. Unnecessary information is doubly important to the analyst. In a plane. The expected is on a plane. We must consider that the subject has a need for us to know he was in a plane. Why would he have this need? Deplaned. Would we think you never got off the plane? This is unnecessary information. It is important enough to the subject. What would make this important enough to say? Is the subject doubling down on his need for us to know he was on a plane? If he were telling the truth, he would have no such need. And this is one of the things that jumped out at me. I've never heard anyone say that they deplaned when they travelled somewhere on a plane. The subject's use of the pronoun I in I deplaned. Was he the only one on the plane? So this is indicative of possible deception here, because pronouns are always reliable. So if he's making it up, he's making a mistake over the pronoun. Why does the subject feel it necessary to tell us he waited for a bus? Is he going back into memory and bringing out the time he deplaned and then waited for a bus? The bus drove me. This is passive language. Passivity is used to conceal either responsibility or identity. Were there any other workers? Why the strange wording? How else could this be said? The subject could have said, I caught a flight to Groom Lake and then a bus to the facility. The wording is padded out. The subject is using a lot of effort to tell us insignificant details of his journey.
The S4 facility is an area just off the Papoose lake bed, dry lake bed. And it consists of 9 hangars. The hangars have sloped doors on them with a sand texture coating.
The description of the hangars and the texture of the doors is something that could appear in language from experiential memory. It is noted that the colour is excluded. Inclusion of colour can sometimes be an indication that a subject has had physical contact with something. Hangars have sloped doors on them. This is a strange claim. The engineering logistics and cost to make a sloped hangar door would be incredible. To what end? The subject added the words on them, which is unnecessary and sounds like storytelling. Interesting observation that just a vertical door is a lot easier to manufacture than a sloping door.
Around the opposite end of the hangars, there's the standard entrance where you're dropped off at, go through a security check, and inside there's a small complex.
This information is void of the pronoun I, which would place the subject there. Instead, we have the weaker you're dropped off at, which is less reliable. We need the subject to tell us what he did, what he saw, etc., using the powerful pronoun I. So far, he has not.
There is some office space. There are several laboratories, the hangars themselves, of course, and a few other places. I didn't have free rein to go wherever I wanted to.
Is again a pause. There is. This is present tense language. The subject should be telling us what he saw in the past tense. When was this interview and when was he claiming he worked there? Office space. Why does the subject not say the simpler there were offices? Why the present tense and why the need to say office space? What are a few other places? The subject then tells us in the negative what he didn't have, which was free rein to go wherever he wanted. Was he stopped? Was he told he couldn't go to some areas? The subject gives this with the pronoun I.
Everywhere I went to, I was essentially escorted, so that was really all about that I saw.
Who was escorting him? Being escorted is weakened by essentially. All about what I saw. The subject stumbles over his words here after giving us the sensitive reason why he didn't see more. Considering the subject claims to have worked on alien technology, it is unexpected that he would say and stumble over telling us that was really all about what I saw.
Inside the facility, what was the basic layout? Were there underground levels?
I don't think there were any underground levels to it, though there could have been. I don't think it was an extensive underground facility. It just looked like an installation that was butt up against a mountain. And, I didn't see any evidence of any stairs going down, elevators, or, but like I said, I don't know. There could have been, and I just might not have been permitted in those areas.
The subject does not answer the question, making it sensitive to him. He tells us nothing about the basic layout of the facility. The subject commits with the pronoun I in the negative and in the context of not thinking twice, not seeing any evidence, and not knowing regarding the question of underground levels. The subject has a need to persuade I don't know, but wants to keep the intrigue there could have been. Is his story too weak that he wants the intrigue?
It's difficult to really surmise how long it had been operational. Everything did look fairly new. By that I mean I don't think this installation was there in the early 70s. Nothing was worn.
The subject changes the question of layout to the age of it, telling us everything looked fairly new. This is then minimized or negated with the word but. The subject then self-censors on I mean. What was he going to say? He then tells us in the negative, making it important that he doesn't think the installation was there in the early 70s. Why? Why does he feel it necessary to tell us this? Then in the negative, the subject tells us nothing was worn.
Things look fairly freshly painted, so as a ballpark guess, I would say it would really surprise me if the installation was older than 5, 7, 10 years, something like that.
The question posed was regarding the layout. It was the subject that chose to talk about the age of the facility. The subject tells us that things were fairly freshly painted, which is then his reason why, which is sensitive in itself, with 5 points of weakness, he guesses the age to be vaguely 5 to 10 years old. If the building was sitting in the desert for 5 to 10 years, it would not likely appear fairly freshly painted. Is the subject simply making this up? It is only a point of the age of the building, but it was the subject himself who raised this and then proceeded to make vague, passive comments about it. Why? The subject has a story about an alien craft. Why would he be wasting time telling us about the paint of things? Things is passive. Passivity is used to conceal either identity or responsibility.
A scientist killed in the project. What exactly happened there?
Allegedly, obviously, I didn't see this and I don't know it to be fact, but this is what I was told, that I was hired to replace one of a couple people that were killed while working on one of the reactors from one of the crafts. Apparently, they, for whatever reason, cut open an operating reactor, and the device exploded, killing both of them. The scientists that were killed there, allegedly the detonation from the explosion was fairly large. It would have rivaled a small tactical nuke. So it was done at the Nevada test site, and it was to be passed off as an unannounced nuclear test.
Is this narrative? There is nothing here to affirm the subject's account. These lines are presented in passive language. Passivity is used to conceal identity and/or responsibility.
Did you have any direct contact or communication with aliens?
No, not at all.
Whether the subject is making the whole story up or the subject is telling the truth, this sentence does not tell us. None at all adds sensitivity to know.
What was your job description at S4?
My official job description was a senior staff physicist. I don't know if I actually had that position when I was there, because I was there so infrequently.
The subject adds the word official to job description. This may be a need to persuade that he had a job description. After telling us this, the subject pauses, and again using the pronoun I, tells us what he doesn't know. It is noted that the subject's use of the pronoun I is mainly reserved for what he doesn't know. He distances himself from the position of senior staff physicist with the word that, and unnecessarily tells us when he was there. Is this need to tell us when I was there to continue to try to persuade us that he was actually there? This need likely betrays the opposite. The subject has a need to tell the reason why he doesn't know if he actually held the position he claims to have. This is sensitive.
I wasn't supervising anyone, so that was the official position I was hired under, but whether or not I actually acted in that capacity, I don't know.
Anything in the negative is doubly important. Interestingly, this is likely a truthful sentence. I wasn't supervising anyone. The subject then self-censors again. Again, the subject uses the pronoun I to tell us he doesn't know. He continues to tell us using the pronoun I what he doesn't know, what he didn't do, that he wasn't supervising anyone. We look to see what he can tell us that he did do when using the powerful pronoun I.
What was the size of the staff working on Project Galileo?
Well, there were 22 people employed there totally.
Well is opposed to think. It could be appropriate if he cannot remember. People is passive again. A more detailed description would be expected. I would expect there were 10 scientists, 10 military, etc. The subject told us he was escorted everywhere. This would be a good place to break that down and give a description of who was there.
And that was specifically for the Galileo project?
No, for the entire project.
Oh, I see.
There were 22 people with majestic clearance. I had majestic clearance. Majestic clearance was designated as clearance 38 levels above Q clearance, and Q clearance is the civilian top secret clearance.
When did you see your first disc?
The first disc I saw, I believe it was the second, or I think it was the third time I was up there.
The subject slows down the pace and parrots the question, making it sensitive to him and allowing him time to think. Believe is weak. It allows others to believe otherwise. The number 3 is known as the liar's number. When a deceptive person needs to choose a number, they will often choose number 3. 2 seems too little, 4 seems too high. The number 3 often sits just right. Here the subject appears to talk us through that process to arrive at the third time. Does the third time feel just right for the narrative the subject is building?
Normally the bus pulled around to the opposite end of the facility, which was the main entrance, and that's where we went in. On this particular occasion, it pulled up to one of the hangar doors, which were normally closed, and the last one was open.
Is this narrative building? There are no pronouns to provide us with reliable sentences. The inclusion of normal in a statement is often an indication of not normal.
We came out, and I saw the disc in the hangar. Upon seeing it, it struck me that, well, this explains all the UFO sightings. Not thinking that it was an extraterrestrial craft, that this must have been some advanced form of fighter that we've been working on for years, and, you know, people have just caught it being tested, so on and so forth.
The length of this sentence is an indication that the subject is exhibiting an increase in emotion. Where did the subject and others come out from? The bus? Don't we get off a bus? Why would the subject choose "we came out"? We now have the inclusion of the powerful pronoun I at a critical point in the statement. I saw the disc in the hangar. The article "the" is not expected here. Articles are instinctive and reliable indicators in language. When first seen and spoken of, the article "a" should be used. We use articles from a very early age and they are instinctive. The use of the article "the" is an indication of prior knowledge of the disc, or it is an indication that the subject is not speaking from experiential memory. After the disc has been introduced with the article "a", as in I saw a disc in the hangar, then to use "the" is fine. Using before is a red flag for deception. Upon seeing it, the subject self-censors here after using the pronoun I. What did he stop himself from saying? He censors himself on the pronoun I. If he is being deceptive, this would remove the internal stress that lying with the strong pronoun would cause. The subject omits the pronoun I from what he was not thinking.
And it never even occurred to me, even though I was looking at an extraterrestrial vehicle, that, you know, this wasn't man-made.
The subject tells us in the negative what he didn't think about what the object wasn't. We want the subject to tell us what happened, what he did, and what he saw. The word "although" here is to say without question. It does not have the same reliability as telling us, I saw an extraterrestrial vehicle. The subject has gone back to the article "an" after using "the" inappropriately. The article now should be "the." This is incongruent with a truthful account.
When did you realize the craft was not of earthly origin?
Well, it probably really hit me when I got inside the craft and looked around and began to understand how the craft was operated, and finally grasped the whole project as a whole, as what we were doing, the fact that we weren't building this thing, we were trying to find out how it was made. We were back engineering it.
The subject pauses for a moment before answering. The subject adds 2 points of sensitivity and weakness to when he realized. It probably really hit me. The addition of the word probably is passive voice and weakens his claim. The disc is now the craft, which was the word used in the question. Repeating the craft is unnecessary. A congruent answer to the question would be, when I got inside. The addition of the craft may be a need to persuade that the subject was inside. Even the words got inside is out of place. One would expect him to say when he went inside. Got inside distances himself from entering. The subject skips the pronoun on grasping the whole project. Wouldn't they simply tell them what they were to do? Why would they leave them to figure this out on their own? This would waste time, effort, and would make it harder for them to accomplish anything. If the subject had clearance and was to be working on a project such as this, it is expected that he would be briefed thoroughly on what he was to be doing.
Now, scientists aside, what was your emotional response? What were you thinking were the implications to the world or man in general from these revelations?
I really didn't think about implications of that sort. As far as emotionally, people have asserted that, boy, that must have been the most exciting time in your life, and that's not the way it was.
After starting with the pronoun I, the subject goes into the negative of what he didn't think and how it wasn't the most exciting time for him. We want him to tell us how he felt, not how he didn't feel.
When I first got to look inside the craft, all I can say, it's an ominous feeling. You walk in there and it feels as if you shouldn't be there. I know that sounds kind of corny, but it's a real ominous feeling. It's not an exciting feeling.
This is a strange question from the interviewer. What did you see? What did you do? Would be better for analysis. This is a personal question for the subject. How did he feel? He removes himself from reliability by telling us how you would feel in present tense. I felt like I shouldn't be there would be expected. The subject tells us you feel as if you shouldn't, present tense, be there. He then tells us it's not exciting. Anything in the negative is doubly important. Why is it not exciting? Surely for a scientist there couldn't be anything more exciting than a disk from another planet and you have clearance to access it.
It brings up a whole lot of questions in your mind. Well, where did this come from? And you know that they won't give you the answers to the whole story, but it's that's the only way I can describe it.
The questions are in your mind, not the subject's. This is the sort of language used when teaching usually something more common. Being inside an alien craft is not a common experience that the listener will identify with, so I is expected. They is passive. Who is they? Passivity hides either identity or responsibility.
It produces a gravity wave, which is similar to the gravity wave that the Earth produces. However, the craft phase shifts the wave. In other words, it turns the wave not really in an opposite polarity, but something to that effect, where it will work against the natural gravity wave of the Earth, and it produces lift in that effect.
The words used here to describe the way the craft works are vague and weakened by the subject's own words. This could be appropriate in that he does not expect the listener to be able to understand, but in conjunction with his lack of reliability throughout the interview, it is more likely that this vagueness is due to his lack of knowledge. Analysis conclusion. The subject does not linguistically commit to working at the facility. The subject demonstrates a need to persuade that he went to the S4 facility, especially around his description of how he got there. His lack of strong pronoun usage and need to persuade he was in a plane, not the more common on the plane, likely indicates the opposite. This extreme need is demonstrated by his need to tell the listener that he deplaned. The subject demonstrates he knows how to use the strong pronoun I. He does so mainly when he tells us what he doesn't know, what he doesn't think, and what he didn't do. We expect to see this strong pronoun usage in what he did do, what he saw, and what he said, etc. He does not. In places where this strong pronoun is expected, the subject uses you, or the one place that he does, I saw the disk inside the hangar, he uses an incongruent article. The incongruent article at this critical point in the interview is likely an indication that the subject is not speaking from experiential memory. The subject mixes up the article again later in the interview. The mixing up of articles in a statement is a strong signal of deception. The subject is likely fabricating a story around him being a scientist who was flown to a secret base to work on an extraterrestrial aircraft. Not very good for Bob Lazar, is it? And let me just make a few comments, though. There was a piece of evidence produced, right, at a court, which was Bob Lazar's employment papers, and they prove that he worked for naval intelligence, right? Now, they were produced for a judge. I think it's very unlikely in a court situation you are going to produce false documents of your employment, because that's perjury, and you can go to prison for quite a long time for that. So I suspect Lazar did work for naval intelligence, which is what it stated on his employment history, and the judge states that, right? So he does work for naval intelligence, but his story about going to S4 is probably manufactured, right? Now, I suspect that that means that Lazar didn't make up the whole thing himself, right? I suspect he was drafted into naval intelligence to become a disinformation asset. Now, if you know anything about how disinformation works, they don't create a disinformation asset just for fun, just to give some UFO enthusiasts something to talk about. It's usually done for a reason, right? And usually it means there's something similar, or there's certain things that he's saying in that manufactured story that are similar to something that they are doing. So that if information from the real secret project comes out, right, everyone will just say, oh, you got that from Bob Lazar. Right? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're working on discs from acquired from aliens. I don't know what it means. It might mean that they are working on all different types of flying disc technology, but they've developed it themselves. And the alien aspect has been added into Lazar's story to put that out so that it keeps covered up the fact that the military perhaps are working on flying discs, right? I don't know that's the reason for the disinformation. Maybe there are aliens. As you know, I've been interested in UFOs for some time now, and over the years, let's just say the body of evidence for UFOs, more and more of it, in my mind, has been discredited. And I think Andrew Johnson did a very good job with his book called Acknowledged, right? All about what Andrew does. He goes with a fine-tooth comb through much of the evidence in the field of ufology, and he picks out what he thinks is the best evidence. And I think Andrew does cast some aspersions on the Bob Lazar. He certainly doesn't say that the Bob Lazar story is correct or valid, right? I think he concludes that the Lazar story does contain disinformation, and I think from this analysis that's probably true. But that doesn't mean to say that there's not a secret project somewhere which is along the lines of what Lazar has come out with.